This is a story thousands of years old, but just as true today as it was long, long ago. It is no ordinary story. There's no such thing as an ordinary story when stories come from such extraordinary lives. This tale I tell is just one clip out of a grander story, snipped out like a picture hung on the walls of time. It is a picture we've seen throughout history, a story of sacrifice, of courage, of justice, hate, and love, of a chosen people threatened by evil, and the God who comes to save them over and over again. The story begins and ends in the land of Persia, in a great and mighty kingdom ruled by a great and mighty king. This king was Xerxes, who ruled from India to the Nile. He celebrated his greatness and the power he had over the nations of the world. But even such a great king, possessing so much, still felt a deep emptiness inside, for he was all alone. He once had a queen named Vashti, but he had sent her away in exile because she would not obey him or his royal decrees. He was sorry to have lost his queen and was in low spirits, so his advisors and wise men suggested that he find himself another wife to replace her and to fill the empty space. So a decree was made, and the king's men went all across the land looking for beautiful, pure young women to come before him, and the one who pleased him most and found favor in his eyes he would crown as the new queen. In the land of Shushan, there was a Jew of the tribe of Benjamin named Mordecai. His great-grandfather had been brought in exile to the land of Babylon from Jerusalem many years before. Now Mordecai had a cousin named Hadassah, whom he took care of, for she neither had father nor mother. The young girl, also known as Esther, was very lovely, and when the decree went out that the king was looking for a new queen, Esther was soon taken. Now Mordecai warned Esther not to tell a soul that she was Jewish, so she kept the secret hidden, and when she left him to go prepare to meet the king, she didn't breathe a word of it to anyone. For 12 long months, Esther and all the other young women were pampered and prepared for their one chance to impress the king, in hopes of gaining the crown. Esther found favor wherever she went, and was soon given extra special care. 7 servant girls, more luxurious chambers, and all the finest clothing and perfumes. Each day slipped into the next, every hour 1 hour closer to that awaited moment. And every day Mordecai waited outside the gate, hoping to hear of Esther in hopes that she was well. Time passed very slowly. She could have chosen any amount of costly things to wear and go with her to meet Xerxes. But if anything, she only requested to know what it was that would most please the king. She dressed and prepared, and everyone who looked on her was amazed, for there was not another young woman more pleasing than Esther. Finally, it was her chance. It was time to meet the king. and Esther found favor in the eyes of the king. There was great rejoicing across the land. King Xerxes had taken a new bride and placed a crown upon her head to crown her queen. A great banquet was laid and a holiday declared to celebrate the beautiful Queen Esther. And Mordecai still sat at the king's gate. One day, while sitting in the gate, Mordecai heard something. Something was wrong. Something was stirring. He heard voices. He listened. Something about killing? Killing? Killing what? Killing whom? He held his breath. Two of the guards were angry. They were very angry. He waited. They were conspiring to assassinate the king. Mordecai rushed to tell Queen Esther. Queen Esther rushed to tell the king and gave credit to Mordecai. The report was investigated and was found to be true. The two guards were hung upon the gallows. Mordecai had saved Xerxes, and it was written in the royal books in the presence of the king. But that wasn't the end of the darkness in the land of Persia. I would like to say that only these two in all the land were found to have evil intentions toward the king and the people. Unfortunately, that isn't so. There are far too many who seek gain for themselves, money and power, and for reasons I cannot explain, except because of evil they hate, and they work to destroy anyone they despise. In those darkening days, such a person was raised to power in the land, given a position next to the king, high above the other nobles and princes. He was a self-important man named Haman. It was law that everyone must bow to Haman whenever he passed by, but there was one man who would not. As every head would lower and faces brush the ground as Haman's feet pompously paraded by, good Mordecai would not bend. The king's men told him repeatedly to bow, but he would not. So they told Haman, and Haman was enraged, and when he found out that Mordecai was a Jew, he loathed him all the more. Haman wanted to destroy him, but to Haman's cruelty, killing just one Jew wasn't enough. He wanted them all dead. Haman went to King Xerxes and told him that there was a certain despicable people in the land who would not obey the king. The king hated disobedience. He had even banished his own queen Vashti because she would not obey. So when Haman said, "You must not tolerate this," the king was quick to comply and agreed to let Haman kill every single one of them. A royal decree was made once again, not to find a queen, but to kill, destroy, and annihilate her people. But the king did not know that they were her people, for Esther still kept the secret that she was a Jew. Haman cast the pur, or lots, to decide the fateful day. It was decided. The end of the Jews would come on the 13th day of the 12th month, the month of Adar. Mordecai heard of the plan and was greatly distressed. He rushed to let Esther know of what was to happen. He begged Esther to speak to the king and reverse the edict, but she was afraid and refused to do it. It would mean death, for hardly anyone who came before the king uninvited ever left alive. There was only one small hope. If the king would give her a sign that she was welcome, her life would be spared. Everything hung on that one small chance. Mordecai replied, asking her if she thought that she alone could be saved from the destruction of her people. Would being queen be enough to save her? No, she would die along with every other man, woman, and child on that day. Everything was suspended upon that moment. The only chance to live hung on her word and upon the mercy of the king. He told her that yes, perhaps salvation for the Jews would rise from another place, but she would still surely die. And then he asked the question that still haunts and echoes to this very day, just as sobering and empowering as it was when Mordecai first spoke the words. And who knows but that you have come to royal position for such a time as this? She replied and asked Mordecai to gather all the Jews to fast and pray with her for 3 days and 3 nights. She said, "When this is done, I will go to the king, and if I perish, I perish." So on the 3rd day, after fasting and praying before God, Esther put on her royal robes and prepared to go before the king once again. There was no certainty as to what would occur when she entered the halls of the king. There was no promise that life would be granted her. Everything depended upon his wishes. It wasn't what she would have chosen, but she was chosen, and her time had come. She entered to stand before the throne. When the king saw her standing in the courts, the moment came, and everything was held fragile and suspended. But then, after that pause of eternity, he beckoned her to approach. Esther had found favor in the eyes of the king once again. Then the king asked, "What is it, Queen Esther? What is your request? Even up to half of my kingdom, and it will be given you." Relieved, she replied, "If it please the king, let the king together with Haman come today to a banquet I have prepared." It was agreed, and that night the king and Haman attended the banquet. While at the banquet, the king asked Esther once again what her petition was. Again she replied, "My petition and my request is this: if the king regards me with favor, and if it pleases the king to grant my petition and fulfill my request, let the king and Haman come tomorrow to a banquet I will prepare for them. Then I will answer the king's question." Again the king agreed. Well, Haman left the banquet feeling very proud and happy for being the only man asked to come to the banquet with the king and the queen. But his conceited glee was soon abruptly stopped, for there was Mordecai sitting in the gate, not moving a muscle. He neither rose nor showed fear at the presence of Haman. Well, that was not to be borne. Haman was furious and stomped home to rant and fume to his wife and friends about the hated Jew Mordecai. He said, "I am the only other person invited both today and tomorrow to dine with the king and Queen Esther, but still that will give me no satisfaction if that Jew Mordecai is still sitting at the gate." So his friends and wife told him to build a gallows 75 feet high and asked the king in the morning to hang Mordecai upon it. The suggestion devilishly delighted Haman, and so he had the gallows built. But that same night, the king could not sleep. His bed was hard as metal, his pillows like stone, his eyes stared wide open. Finally, he called for a book of records of his reign to be read. It was found recorded that Mordecai had saved his life some time before from the 2 guards conspiring to assassinate him. The king sat up. What had been done to reward Mordecai? When he found out that nothing whatsoever had been done, he heard someone in the court. It was Haman, who was coming to ask the king's permission to hang Mordecai. The king asked for him to come in. When he did, the king asked him, "What should be done for the man the king delights to honor?" Now Haman thought, "Who is there that the king would rather honor than me?" So he prescribed the most elaborate and fanciful honors he could think of. He imagined wearing the king's royal robes, being paraded through the city, with a prince going before him, proclaiming, "This is what is done for the man the king delights to honor." Well, the king was pleased with the idea and said, "Go at once, do all that you have said for the Jew Mordecai, and do not neglect a single thing that you have recommended." And so wonderfully, so ironically, Haman himself was forced to place the king's royal robes upon Mordecai's shoulders. Haman himself had to lead him through the city, proclaiming for all to hear, "This is what is done for the man the king delights to honor." Mordecai returned to the gate, but Haman stormed home, fuming at being so humiliated before all the people. Night fell, and the time for the second banquet had come. The king and Haman arrived, feasting and drinking and enjoying the night. Once again the king asked, "Queen Esther, what is your petition? It will be given you. What is your request? Even up to half of my kingdom, and it will be granted." Perhaps she paused. Perhaps she trembled. But then brave Queen Esther made her request. "If I have found favor with you, my king, and if it please your majesty, grant me my life, and spare me my people. This is my request. For I and my people have been doomed to destruction, and slaughter, and annihilation. I would have kept silent, but such injustice causes me to risk disturbing you, O king." King Xerxes demanded, "Where is he? Who is the man who has dared to do such a thing?" Queen Esther replied, "The adversary and enemy is this vile Haman." Haman was terrified. The king, enraged, had already decided his fate and ordered that Haman be hung on the gallows that had been intended for Mordecai. That same day, the king gave all of Haman's estate to Esther, and Esther in return gave the estate to Mordecai. The king put him in Haman's place, brought from the gate into the courts of the king, and made prince of all princes in the land of Persia. Every evil decree Haman had proclaimed was reversed, and the word went out through all the land that death would not come upon the Jews, but upon their enemies. Copies of the edict were made and sent throughout the land, signed in the king's name by Mordecai, and sealed with the signet ring of the king, which now was placed on Mordecai's hand. Mordecai left the presence of the king in royal robes, set in the place of his enemy. And for the Jews it was a time of great happiness and rejoicing, gladness and honor. In every province, in every city, great jubilation erupted across the land. And to this day we celebrate the Feast of Purim, for the pur was cast to decide the fate of God's people. But though the lot was cast that they should know greatest sorrow and terror, it was changed, and instead the lot fell that God's people should know peace and great jubilation, for they were made victorious over every enemy, even death.